So we have about 16 participants, so people may join us in a bit. If not, then it will be a nice small group that gets to talk about plain language today. So hi, everyone, and welcome to the first Ask the Trainer session of the week. We're here to follow up on Module 3's topic of plain language, and we have Georg and Denise, who are going to be answering any questions you have today. So first of all, because we're a small group, if you feel comfortable, we'd invite you to turn on your webcams. So it maybe mimics an environment where we're all in the same room together. If you wish, it'd be great to see your faces. If not, that's fine too. The other thing just to share, if you'd like to ask any questions today, we did not get any on the Learning Experience platform, but we invite any questions you might have in real time as we talk today. So you can do that either by asking it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and you can ask it verbally if you prefer that way. And I think that's all the housekeeping before we get started. So before I hand it off to Georg and Denise, who are going to comment on some of the dialogue that they've heard on the online platform, I'd like to just pause for a minute to see if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask about the module, about the examples or the activities online before we hand it over. So I might pause for a second to see if anyone wants to indicate any questions in the chat or raise their hand.
Or just unmute themselves.
Or
we
just
can all do that now.
Yeah, pretty small enough.
All right, so how about we get started and then we'll see if you have any questions rolling in. We'll just answer them as we go. I'll pass it over to both of you to comment online.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. So we went through the comments that people had put on the LXP, and we grouped them into sections to try and respond to people's comments in a logical way. And the first one we wanted to look at was comments about the quiz and the words that we used. And I guess what we really want to say is the comments seem to question some of the definitions of the words, and the comments also suggested that a lot of this depended on the audience and the context. So we wanted to say that we do agree with that completely. It really is very different depending on who you're writing for. Sorry. So if you want to talk about exposure and placebo, yes, in this case we did assume, I think, that they were medicines. And it's okay to have your own definition if you are writing for somebody who you think would use those words differently or understand them more or less. Georg, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think we also had the term quality of life, right? And
yeah,
if you need to replace it or not. I think both our feeling was that you could actually leave that. And maybe my idea was that I think a couple of times where that term came up, I said, quality of life as assessed with an established questionnaire or something. So you get a rough idea. I wouldn't go into detail of explaining what I think the multiple questionnaires out there to assess all kinds of aspects of quality of life, but at least that you get a very rough idea. Oh yeah, it's okay, it's a questionnaire. It's not like sitting down and talking for 2 hours.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yes, and it will depend very much on what the definition of quality of life is in the review that you're writing about. There's one that I'm doing at the moment is talking about quality of life, meaning fatigue, or I think it says neurological outcomes, which is not very specific, so not particularly helpful, but it's definitely they're talking about fatigue. So you can definitely define these kind of things however you think is best. I don't know, we can't have a show of hands, Stephanie, can we? I was going to ask everybody if they understand or they think other people understand what quality of life means.
But yeah, if you have your hand up, you could do that, or on chat, if you want to say.
Helena, do you want to say something about quality of life?
No, I just wanted to say that I agree with you that I think most people understand what the term means, but I also agree with what you just said, that depending on the topic or maybe the CRG might mean different things. Like, for example, for us, we handle a lot of reviews with quality of life in terms of endometriosis, which is a disease that can be very painful, and that it's different for someone else, maybe with a different disease. But the term in general, it's an endless discussion, right? Some people might think, I know what this means. Some people think, well, I don't know what it is. So
it's really hard to know. I think the really important thing is, as with almost everything that we're talking about with plain language, is there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong answer. So much depends on context, it depends on your audience, and just depends on lots of things, really.
I liked your advice by checking to check for example, patients groups websites. This can be really helpful for different groups.
Good
suggestion.
Yes, I agree.
I don't know what kind of texts all of you write. Some of them might be some of you probably work for a specific CRG, and it's all on one topic, and it's mostly aimed at people interested in that one topic, maybe because they're patients with some condition. That all influences how you can talk about it, right? Because I think if you know you're talking to someone who is affected by a certain condition, you can assume that they know quite a bit of the jargon, right? That they know the name of their condition, and that so you don't have to explain. You don't have to start at the same level. If you're writing to a very broad audience, you might have to go further down to explain more basic things about the results. So it really very much depends on who you think your audience is. But I personally write a lot just for the general Cochrane Germany homepage news, or we have a blog that we do together with Cochrane Austria and Switzerland. And that's, of course, that we always struggle to define our audience, because we really don't quite know who they are. We're wondering, is it mostly people that work in healthcare? Or is it more people that are affected by something, and they're looking online and they just happen to run into our web pages, and they might need a bit more explanation. So it's always a difficulty, and there's really not a clear answer. Maybe it's a bit clearer if you work in a specific field and for a specific set of patients.
Yeah, I think so. We had a comment from Yoko Wong in Singapore, who said that they always check with the Health Promotional Board to see what medical terms they use in their pamphlets. And when I'm writing, I always check the NHS websites, because they have really good information for patients, and they're usually written really well, really clearly. So I find that very useful. And consumer organizations often have websites that are very useful as well. So if you're worried about a particular word or phrase, it's a really good idea to check one of those sources.
Yeah, we also had the suggestion or an example of Emma, I think Emma Doble.
Emma Doble, yeah.
Yeah, who said she's looking for input from a consumer, from someone affected, I assume. If that's possible, that's great. For me, for example, that's often not possible because my topics keep changing all the time. So I'm not specialized at all. It would be kind of difficult to always find a consumer.
Yeah, but if you're with a group and you have some consumers that you work with, or if you are a consumer, then obviously you've got more of an idea than some of us have.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another point that led on from that I'm just trying to find. No, I can't find it. So we move on to the next thing. So we talked about that. Again, with the words, somebody asked a question about the glossary. Some people found the glossary at the end of the plain language summary guidance quite useful. And I'd like to think that this is a living resource in a way, so that it can change. If people think, well, I don't really like that, or if they have a better explanation for something, then if they let me know, then I can change it. But I'd like to think it's a useful resource as well. So the more input, the better, I think. And the other query relating to that was the difference between plain language and lay language, and whether there is a difference between that. Georg and I had a chat about this morning, and we thought, actually, we don't really know. We had to have a good think about that. Do you want to explain that, Georg?
I can. So I think the comment said that we made a clear distinction, and then we were both like, did we? I don't think we did. But and we kept discussing a little bit, and I think our outcome was that plain language is not necessarily about medical things or anything. It's more about the, for example, sentence structure. So keep your sentences short, keep your words short, don't use jargon. Those are the issues of plain language. And then lay language is really more when you're thinking of something that's about a certain topic that's quite complicated. It's about that's trying to not use jargon and make it accessible to lay people. But of course, it's not quite interchangeable, but very similar.
Yeah. So you could be writing about almost anything, and we'd advise you to use plain language, but you don't necessarily have to use lay language, depending on your audience.
Yeah. So the plain language is really about making this language easy to read. I guess. Yeah. Which leads us, I guess, to the next point here on my notes, which is a couple of comments on readability tests and the reading level that you're aiming at. And I think it was Amy Verstappen who tried some of the texts that we had as examples there, and she came up with she put it in one of these readability calculators, and she came up with grade 10 level, which I thought wasn't too bad because, as we said, you often have to use some medical words, right? And they can drive up your score. So it's to really reach like the perfect level in these flash reading ease thing, it has to be very simple language, and then you're struggling with any kinds of, you're getting quite close to this example we gave of the too simple language, right? What's
the
Monroe?
100 most common words in the
Yeah,
English
exactly.
language. Yeah. Yes.
So that would definitely give you a good readability score, but
Yes.
that might be a bit
And
beyond.
I think they also look at the length of each word, don't they? So they might count the number of syllables you have in a word, and the longer the words are, the harder they are to read. So you could have a word like experiencing, which has quite a few syllables in, but it's not a hard word. Yeah. Or I can't think of one now. Acceptability. I don't suppose I'd use that, but again, it's not a particularly hard word. Yeah.
They also look. I think some of these scores look at word frequency in the. I mean, most of them are based in the English language, and they have some of them use like just a word frequency list, and they look at how frequently a word is used, and then they give you a better score if you only use really frequent words. But that can be quite difficult if you're writing about something very specific.
Yeah. So even if you use a hard word and you explain it, it counts the hard word as a hard word, so you get marked down. So it's also worth remembering that.
I can also chip in as from the perspective of a non-native English speaker, that sometimes the words that are not, well, perhaps wouldn't be considered difficult for English speakers, but they're unusual. I remember one time an English speaker said the word untoward. And I tell you, I mean, I'm using English for a long time, and I've never heard that. Never heard that word untoward. So, but for that speaker, for that person, that was a perfectly normal English word, not really long, not complicated. It's just unusual, and that's something that also, I guess, and then these are other phrases which are, with collocations and that kind of thing, which for English speakers is very, almost.
Yeah. It's sort of normal.
It's a normal thing that you would use in everyday language, but there are phrases that for non-English speakers maybe not familiar.
Yeah, I remember speaking to a Danish woman who was a professor of, I think she was a professor of film and television. Her English was amazing, and she'd just come back from Japan, and I thought, oh, how lovely. I said, how did you find it? And she literally thought I meant, did she look on a map? How did she get there?
How did you find Japan?
Yeah, how did you find it? And I thought that's such a common expression, but she obviously just hadn't come across it.
Yeah. It's like a false friend, I think they're called, right? The things that do translate, but then they have slightly different meaning, the other language.
Yes. Anyway, we had some really useful comments about the PLS template and how to approach writing. And I thought that they were very useful. And one really good piece of advice is not to try and rewrite something that's written in an academic way, but to pull out the main points and then write it as if you're explaining it to somebody in your own words. And I remember Nuala saying in one of the last modules that when she's trying to explain something, she imagines she's explaining it to her little brother. So she thinks about what she wants to say and she has to express herself in a way that she knows her brother's going to understand. And if you can put yourself in the shoes of somebody who doesn't understand the topic, that's also really helpful. So you think about what you might need to know, what words you might not understand. But it is a really good idea to think about not trying to just change what's there, but to actually start again.
Yeah, changing what's there can be really hard work. Like we sometimes translate press releases from English into German, and of course you use the Google Translate or DeepL or something like that, because it makes, if it's long text, it makes it a lot easier. But then it's really difficult to not get stuck on that machine translation, because if you do, they're really good these days, so there's nothing wrong in the text. But if you read it, you realize this is not real German. This is some weird automatically translated German, right? So if you want to make that a good text again, you really have to change a lot. Actually, just sentence structure becomes really weird when you do automatic translations. And it's probably the same thing if you have something that you got from a scientist. Who probably thought that they were writing in plain language, can also be quite difficult to just try to edit it, and it can be good idea to just make a note of all the main points that are in there, and then try to rephrase it in your own words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do have a point or some comments about communicating risk and how using graphics are very useful. Do you think, Georg, it's worth sharing your screen to show these graphics that you found?
I could. Let me just see if I still have it open. I think I closed that one, but it's in my Word as well. So I'll share this. Yeah. So there was one example I thought of that I recently came across. I'll share that using graphics, and that was about a Cochrane review about the rapid tests. So hopefully you're able to see this now.
Yeah.
In the Word. And it's always a mind bender to me, at least. Maybe it's different for you, but to keep in mind what does it mean, false positives, false negatives, and how is that dependent on the prevalence of a disease, and all these ins and outs are quite complicated. And they created I think they used it in a press briefing, and it's also in an article on Evidently Cochrane and this UK Cochrane blog, and they used this visualization, and I think it's still quite complicated, but it gives you it's just using this rule of trying to show absolute numbers instead of talking about relative risk and stuff like that. So they just use little dots for, assuming you have 1,000 people with symptoms of COVID-19 and they're all doing a rapid test, and a certain number, in this case, upper example, 20% prevalence, so 20% of these 1,000 people actually do have or are infected with the virus. How many false positives and how many false negatives will you get? And I think the fascinating thing here is that you see the difference. So you have the prevalence of 20% here and the prevalence of 5%. So only 5% of these 1,000 people are actually infected. And then you can see how that influences the number of your false negatives over here and the number of your false positives over here. Mm. And that makes it a lot easier to understand than just having a text that explains everything, because in the text you tend to have all these different numbers. They're all kind of similar but all different, and it's really difficult to keep track of what is what. So this is probably maybe it's not the best example because it's still relatively complicated, but I think it makes the complicated thing a lot easier, at least.
Yeah, thank you. And we just saw at the very bottom of that somebody had asked for resources in languages other than English. And I have to say, I don't have any of those resources. Georg might have some in German.
I would have something in German, but is there anybody else German in the group here?
Yeah. So if anybody else had any resources in any other languages, then they're very welcome to let us know, and we can put them on the LXP.
Or you can link in the comments to the additional resources.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, I think, I mean, I really kind of, it caught me when Denise, when you mentioned that this glossary was found useful, and I'm thinking if we could use the remaining time of this course to perhaps build up on that, because I'm assuming that some, if not many, of people participating in this course are in a way working in writing plain language summaries and are basically facing these words that they need to try to translate. And I mean, I'm just thinking if we could use this time that we have until the end of the course to perhaps generate or perhaps expand that base of words and possible alternatives to these words. That might be perhaps a good joint action for everyone.
I think that's a really good idea. Yeah. And there is also one of the things that we did in the Plain Language Summary project was we gathered together lots of glossaries that were on the Cochrane website or various websites, and amalgamated them and updated them and tried to put plain language definitions for those. So that's still being worked on, but we hope that will be published along with the template for plain language summaries and the guidance when it's approved. And we hope that'll be sort of September time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so by that time, if anyone is feeling like sharing their thoughts or examples, I think you can use this quiz comments section. I think that will be the most appropriate place. So at the end of the course, we can have a look at that and see if what are the contributions.
I'm just looking at the chat. Yes, octogenarian circumlocution. It is worth looking up hard words. I agree. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any questions now? Anything else?
I think one just came in from Ruth on chat for any editors in the audience.
Yeah, I wondered why editors prefer dummy, which has at least 3 meanings, to placebo, which is a pretty precise term. Yeah, I'd be really interested to know how many people think that placebo is a common enough word that doesn't need defining. Because we always, in plain language summaries, put a definition of placebo in as a sham treatment. But somebody said the other day, oh, everybody knows what placebo means. But I don't know if that's true or not. So I don't know what anybody thinks. But yes, dummy certainly does have more meanings than placebo. I don't think sham's very easy either. I agree.
It's one of these things that a lot of people know, and if you want to explain it, it actually takes a whole paragraph, right?
Yes.
Well, it's kind of difficult to find a good,
Yeah, well, maybe that's something we can all work on, try and come up with a really good short, sharp definition of placebo. Oh, apparently it's quite common in Spanish. So does it have a Latin root? Maybe that's why.
Oh, yeah. I see that Sarah commented on, she wouldn't assume that placebo is a commonly understood word.
No.
Sarah, do you have a suggestion? How do you explain it? A dummy pill, yeah. So dummy, see, again, I wouldn't even now that I thought about it, what else does it mean? Yeah, it's a pacifier, right?
Yeah, and it's a mannequin in a shop window.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
But it's also a stupid person, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So
yeah,
dummy
dummies.
pill might be a pill for dummies. That might be also a problem.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we could do this for a lot of terms. I mean, in the comments there was also a comment on what was it? Chronic, exactly. Whether the definition of chronic was was just a long-lasting or lifelong. Actually, that's more a question you have to ask a doctor, I guess, because
yes,
I'm assuming that it doesn't have to be lifelong, that it is just like, well, it's not acute, so it's not short-lasting. It's probably something can be chronic, and you still might be lucky and get rid of it after 3 years.
Yeah, you could still have it chronically for. It's the continuous nature of it, I think, isn't it, rather than the opposite of being a sudden onset thing.
And how about this comment from Emma? At least placebo is the correct term, and therefore can look it up in a dictionary. I mean, it's actually an interesting comment, because yes, placebo is the most correct word. And when you're writing a plain language text, are you assuming that that might be an option that people would go and look the term in a dictionary, or you try to avoid that?
I think you need to try and avoid anything that stops people from reading what you're writing, anything that gives them an excuse to turn away from your text or to back up and think, oh no, that's not for me. I think you need to avoid that.
Yeah. So about placebo, Sarah also wrote here, we always clarify, but there's no obvious go-to alternative. And fake medicine, suggests something deceitful. That's true too.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, it's a judgment call, isn't it?
Yes, as with so many things. Yeah, it's a judgment call. Yeah. So if you can check with somebody who's likely to be one of your readers, then that's a good idea.
I find the same thing quite challenging is with the whole grade issue, where to explain what the grade ratings mean, where you might not get away with not explaining what they mean. But if you just write moderate evidence, certainty of evidence, then people don't know that it's one specific level out of 4.
No, I think that's very, very technical, and certainly our advice for plain language summaries is to try and avoid that kind of technical language, and we do give some explanations of other ways to phrase it. But it is really, really, really hard. So again, if anybody has any suggestions, then that's fantastic. It'd be really good to get a collection of really good ways of saying things in a plain way that people can understand.
So for that issue with the grade ratings, for our blog, we now made a little box that we thought we could, if an article contains a lot of references to grade ratings, you could always add a little text box, say, just giving the 4, basically 1 sentence introduction and then the 4 levels with the definitions. But of course, then you always add another thing into your text, which a lot of people might not find that interesting. It's difficult. Alternative might be to write your own, have like a article that explains grade a bit more in detail maybe, but not too much in detail. And then you have something to reference to. I think that's maybe we'll go for that, I think.
Yeah, and just finally, Andrea says, what about the opposite? People might be turned down because the text is too plain. Well, that's true. You could be at risk of, people might think that you're dumbing down and you're talking down to them. But as Sarah says, it is, at least if you're writing something that's plain, they can read it quickly. And what would be really brilliant, especially in plain language summaries, is to be able to link through to the review or to more detailed information so that people could access more details if they wanted to. But I think ideally you don't want to include anything that people don't understand, but you want to write in a way that means they're not necessarily noticing the writing, they're just taking in the information.
I think the Evidently Cochrane blog has a mouse over glossary, if I'm not totally wrong. I think that works really well, because you're reading the text, and if you really struggle with one of the words, you can just put your mouse over it and get a really short glossary entry.
Yeah, but that's quite dangerous, because I did that once with something that was talking about retaining participants in a trial, and the definition was something about a retainer being something that kept your teeth in place.
Oh.
So it wasn't necessarily, that's why we looked at the glossary, in fact, because I think that was feeding off one of the glossaries. So we needed to make sure that firstly, the glossary is correct, and secondly, that it manages to understand what the text is about, which I think is a different problem.
If it's an automatic glossary, yeah.
Mm.
And of course, a lot of things you write don't, I mean, that's only works if you're writing for an online, for something online,
yeah. Right. Any questions? No?
I think that takes us to time.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Georg and Denise, for lively conversation on plain language. I think the takeaway is that we at Cochrane have a lot of things we need to share about reviews when we disseminate that are hard to put in plain language. And we can all work on that together and, get your input on words that you've found an easier way of saying or a more plainer way of saying. But there are things we could all do, I think, to improve the level of the language that we're writing at to make it more understandable. So I hope you found this helpful. And there's going to be a bit of a break between now and the next time we all meet together live, which will be September. So I'm going to send out an email, look out for it in your inboxes, with the new dates for September and beyond for the rest of our modules and some other pertinent information. But I'd like to thank again Georg and Denise for walking us through plain language and what we can do to improve. And I hope you've all found this useful. And I'll connect with you online and look forward to seeing you all face-to-face online again in September. So enjoy your breaks, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Right.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.